Propaganda, stand guard at the doors of your mind. Are you tired of being bombarded with deceptive grand narratives and propaganda online? In today's digital age, misinformation and deception are more rampant than ever before, making it increasingly challenging to discern fact from fiction. In today's episode, I'll be discussing the importance of using our own discernment, especially in today's world of grand narratives, political biases, and propaganda. The internet has become an integral part of our lives, with many of us spending hours each day scrolling through social media, reading the news, watching videos. However, as the use of technology and the internet continues to grow, we're also witnessing a sizable rise in orchestrated grand narratives and propaganda. What we've seen over the last few years alone is a strong indicator of that rise. Now, Edward Bernays, who's often cited as the grandfather of propaganda, stated in his book entitled Propaganda, the Public Mind in the Making, the title says it all, but he states that the manipulation of public opinion is necessary for social control. He argued that propaganda could be used to shape public opinion and promote certain behaviors or attitudes. He argued that propaganda should be based on an understanding of human psychology and behavior. Propaganda itself, you see, relies on deception and the manipulation of our emotions rather than honest and transparent communication. So you could say in many ways that his work was the precursor to much of the behavioral science that we've witnessed over recent years to infiltrate public opinion and to drive compliance. The manipulation of the public opinion serves, of course, the interests of the powerful elites and the current power structures, which is ultimately harmful to society and undermines democratic values. Plus, the use of propaganda to promote certain agendas can lead to a distorted and incomplete understanding of important issues and create irrational behaviors within the public at large. Now, these grand orchestrated narratives that we witness in the media are stories that aim to explain complex events or ideas by reducing them to a simplistic and often misleading narrative, which becomes particularly dangerous when they are co-opted by the state or by the dominant power structures or corporations, and as such serve the interests of the establishment and the incumbent power structures, as we've witnessed throughout the pandemic. Now, these grand narratives are designed to play on our emotions and fears. They can lead us to adopt extreme or harmful viewpoints, as we witnessed once again throughout the COVID chapter, which caused widespread fear that still perpetuates today. Another example of this in more recent history is the war on terror, the narrative that emerged just after the 9/11 attacks. This narrative was used to justify military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq and to erode civil liberties in the name of national security. There we have it again, safety and security, big drivers of change. It quickly became a grand narrative that was used to justify a range of policies and actions that were often unrelated whatsoever to terrorism, with long-standing consequences, some of those consequences still being felt today, many years on. Now, the media's co-opting of grand narratives can also be seen in a way that where certain issues are prioritized over others. Now, what this serves to do is offer a distraction from the underlying issues, which could be a threat to the dominant power structures. This prioritization reinforces the status quo and maintains the dominant establishment who seek to benefit from it. We've seen it over the last year or so with many different narratives covering up many of the post-pandemic issues, such as the vaccine issues and more. It's almost like any great controversy that could harm the dominant interests are very quickly covered up by mainstream media narratives. Of course, the mainstream media heavily funded by related bodies, often state-funded. Now, similarly, political biases are becoming increasingly prevalent across the web and social media. Many news sources and social media platforms can be accused quite simply of having a political agenda, and this can make it very difficult for people to get an accurate and clear and balanced understanding of the world around them. Gone are the days where being on the left or the right meant adopting certain principles or values. Now we simply have a set of opposing perspectives on any given matter that supposedly align with the political polarities of left or right, often manifesting as a binary for the current thing or against the current thing, even if the current thing is something that traditionally would be considered left or right wing. Take upholding free speech, for example, a traditional, or at least traditionally associated with the left liberal values, now deemed to be right wing. We're so deep into the upside down politically that we're literally at a point where conservatives or Republicans or any right leaning party could enact wealth distribution policies and the left would smear these policies as far right. It's literally become that crazy. We've also witnessed the way in which governments and mainstream media portrayed activists throughout the pandemic. While protests and activism are vital within any healthy and functioning democracy, the media has often framed activists in a negative light, portraying protesters as anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, and of course, far-right extremists. Again, if you look through history, many of the social movements throughout time have often been left-leaning. So to describe any political movement as far-right is just simply false. That's not to say that there aren't far-right activists, of course, but the way in which the media skews the reporting of these protests, of course, is designed to keep the incumbent power structures free from threat, because these movements do threaten the status quo. So these smear tactics and propaganda are used to delegitimize the activism. Then, of course, we have censorship, the censorship of counter narratives, falsely reduced to disinformation, conspiracy, or misinformation in order to preserve the grand narratives and combat the threats to the status quo. Because, of course, those who are creating a counter narrative, those are challenging grand narratives, are a threat because they may indeed reveal the actual reality, which if became a mainstream and widely accepted view, would inevitably have a categorically or catastrophic effect on the powers that currently serve us. What's more, in the US, the EU, and across the UK, big tech and the same small handful of billionaires and their NGOs, the Gates Foundation, the Soros Open Societies Foundation, and more, are funding the fact checkers and the so-called misinformation experts to smear any media sites that they cannot control. For example, Rumble recently became a victim of an attack because Rumble, of course, an independent platform that won't censor information on demand. They won't take members of the FBI into their wings. And as such, the misinformation experts are placing these organizations firmly under the grip of their attack. But we have to ask, what really qualifies as misinformation and who gets to decide? In the online environment, of course, we have many of us circulating amongst others. There are massive amounts of people who occupy the same online space, yet live in completely alternative emotional realities that are based upon entirely contradictory foundational facts. Each group, of course, has their own set of experts of whom they trust to give accurate information, and each group is 100% convinced that the other side is crazy and cannot understand how the other side don't see what they see. However, the two sides are not equal. Those who occupy a reality in which the mRNA booster shots are saviors have been completely targeted by a relentless propaganda campaign backed by some of the world's richest and most powerful entities. The same individuals, of course, who are funding the self-appointed fact checkers and experts to tackle misinformation. And then you have those who occupy a completely different reality, those who see government COVID measures, including the vaccines, and the pain and the damage and the collateral harm that has been caused uh, as a result of these policies. And of course, many of these in this group were already skeptical of big government and giant corporations, or sadly suffered consequences at the hands of the policies of these governments. However, the orchestrators of the pro vaccine, pro mask, pro mandate propaganda campaign appear to understand now, at least, that the upper hand that they once held is slowly slipping away. As an entity, the pharmaceutical industrial complex is desperately now attempting to keep the public's attention on COVID risks and the latest boosters while diverting attention away from the very real safety issues. They seem to be on the back foot now. Now, the methods that the establishment have used include various forms of propaganda techniques, including deception, diversion, projection, gaslighting, censorship, manipulation, and just simple flat out lies. And to make matters worse, we are now dealing with highly sophisticated deep fakes, which could include manipulated videos or images, which are becoming more and more realistic given the developments in artificial intelligence. And as such, it now becomes increasingly challenging to distinguish between what is real and what is not. Okay, if you're putting out a picture of the Pope in a white puffer jacket, it's quite likely that that's a deep fake. But you can already see, if you've seen those viral images, how realistic they can appear. So not only is it images and videos that are being circulated, it's now entire articles written by artificial intelligence. We are seriously approaching a point in time where the ability to discern what is real and what is not is going to become even more challenging. And it's going to lead to even more false information spread online, often likely instigated by these same actors, governments, elites, and more, which will have serious consequences, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. So therefore, the question becomes, what can we do to counter these media grand narratives and propaganda? Well, the latter point is a more and more tricky point to tackle. But firstly, having become aware of narratives and propaganda that are being presented to us, it's essential that we continue to find alternative sources of information. Many of us have already checked out of the mainstream media, but finding reliable sources and credible sources of alternative media can be a challenging task. But it's essential that we find wider perspectives and a more nuanced view of current events in order to maintain a deep sense of discernment. Now, as such, it is increasingly vital to support independent media outlets that prioritize accurate reporting and wider perspectives in order to counter the influence of propaganda. It's certainly one way to avoid the inevitable deep fakes and misinformation that is being spread by these so-called official and trusted sources. Secondly, we must also hold the media accountable for their reporting and challenge them when they perpetuate grand narratives. If you haven't seen the viral clip from Elon Musk's interview with the BBC, you can see how many of these actors are often filled with hot air. And when challenged, they find it incredibly hard to maintain their narratives. It's important that we continue to challenge media in such a fashion. This can involve interviews like we saw with Elon Musk and the BBC, but we ourselves can take action. We don't all have to be famous billionaires to tackle this issue. We can start petitions, write letters, make calls, participate in protests. We can create campaigns that demand accountability and transparency. We've got to challenge the regulators. Ofcom, of course, are complicit in this overall disinformation warfare. And lastly, we must remain vigilant against manipulated media, propaganda, and grand narratives to help ourselves, firstly, discern online, but we must also help others to recognize the importance of critically evaluating the media sources that they consume. Now, by sharing information with others and helping them to identify propaganda and false information and equipping people with the tools to discern for themselves, then we can create a more informed and critical public. On the latter point, here at Elevate, we are working on a project to build a set of tools to help you discern your media that you can you review to help you deepen your sense making. So watch this space. But for now, here are 5 ways that you can use, or 5 methods to identify propaganda online. Firstly, consider the source. Propaganda is often disseminated by biased sources with an agenda. Before accepting any news story or piece of information, consider who's producing it and why. Is the source reputable? Is it credible? Are they known for spreading misinformation? Are they known for supporting grand narratives? Are they known for supporting the state? Are they politically affiliated with any particular group or ideology? We've got to make sense of the source first and foremost. Once a source has shown itself for what it is and its true nature of sharing propaganda and grand narratives, well, it unfortunately becomes an untrusted source, even if it does combine propaganda with good journalism. Secondly, look for emotional appeals. The pandemic was surely a lesson in looking for emotional appeals. We know, looking at the headlines and the fear-based narratives, how easy it is once someone is emotionally manipulated to be to succumb to the propaganda and fall victim of such stories. And when you combine that with policy, then compliance is sure to follow. So look for emotional appeals. Propaganda often uses an emotional appeal to sway opinion. Look for language that is designed to elicit strong emotions such as fear, anger, or outrage. Propagandists may often use loaded language to create an emotional response. So if the reporting is highly emotionalized or sensationalized, you have to be skeptical from the get-go. And that doesn't just apply to mainstream media, also true with alternative media. Thirdly, question the evidence. Propaganda often relies on distorted or manipulated evidence to support its message, often cherry-picked or falsely represented data or statistics, for instance. Look for evidence to back up the claims, look for counter-evidence, and consider whether it's reliable, whether it's biased, and ask yourself whether the evidence presented is balanced and nuanced, and does it show multiple sides of the story. Fourth, check for stereotypes. Propaganda, as we've talked about, uses stereotypes or oversimplified projections of particular messages or individuals. Look for language that implies a particular stereotype, whether that's, again, the smears we've seen as conspiracy theorists or far right, or any other characteristics of a particular group in a negative light. Be skeptical of any information that relies on sweeping generalizations or oversimplifications. These, by the way, have become massive functions of the mainstream media, and as we know, therefore, are rarely trusted sources. That's not to say within the mainstream media outlets there aren't good journalists. There certainly still are. You just have to apply these principles in order to find them. And finally, consider the context. Propaganda often takes events or information out of context to support its message. Consider the broader context of any news story or piece of information, and look for any missing or contradictory information that may provide a more complete picture. In conclusion, the internet remains a powerful tool for learning and exploring and connecting with others, but it's increasingly important that we use our discernment when consuming information online. What the future holds is going to make things even more complex. Artificial intelligence is really going to change the way that media is presented online. Therefore, the human touch is going to be ever more important. The ability to converse, the ability to interact in real time will seemingly give us the opportunity to ask questions and probe deeper, which is exactly what we've tried to create within the Elevate community, the opportunity for us to collectively sense make, to share ideas, to explore stories together. And if you're not part of our community yet, you can head over to weareelevate.org. Now, by being vigilant, we can ensure that we're getting a more accurate understanding of the world around us, or at least being able to spot grand narratives as they emerge. There are so many different tactics that are in use nowadays. It's not just propaganda. There's a whole manner of behavioral science, and a lot of this in the digital world is backed by big data. So it makes it increasingly easy for those who have the resources to manipulate public opinion. But we will stand firm in pursuit of the truth. We will stand firm in pursuit of reality. And it's important now that more and more of us, as we open our eyes to the nature of the world that we're living in right now in these unique times, that we continue to pursue truth and stand up for the facts. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode on propaganda. I'll be back on Monday. There's an important debate taking place on Monday in regards to the pandemic treaty. The pandemic treaty, as you probably know by now, is a key instrument that the World Health Organization is pursuing, which will simply lock in some of the dangerous policies that we've seen over the last few years. Now, subsequent to this, we also have a petition that's live, which is seeking to give Parliament a vote on the international health regulation amendments. These are very two distinct issues. They're interrelated, but they're separate. If you haven't seen my interview with James Roguski yet, please do check that out, where we explore the difference between the treaty and the international health regulations. So both petitions are incredibly important. On Monday, the debate will take place on the pandemic treaty. I'll be covering the result of that debate, and with a little bit of luck, I'll be producing a live watch party. So if you're interested in joining me and our community and watching the debate live as it happens, I mean, the word debate, it'd be interesting to see what level of debate actually unfolds. In my experience of watching any of these subjects, again, we see the same thing here, protecting the dominant interests. But the debate is happening on Monday, and hopefully we'll be able to source a live feed that we can watch together. But if you haven't added your name yet to the second petition on the international health regulations, you can go to uk.stoptheamendments.com. That's uk.stoptheamendments.com and add your name to the petition. It's now hit over 10,000 signatures, which means the government has to reply. But we need to hit 100. We need 100,000 signatures in order for it to follow through with a debate like the debate on Monday. So please do take action. And once again, stand guard at the door of your mind and keep your eyes firmly open for the deception that comes with the misperception of propaganda. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy your weekend.